Maria Torres stood in front of the mirror at 9:30 p.m., pulling her dark hair into a ponytail. Her reflection showed the exhaustion she felt deep in her bones. She'd spent the whole day with her kids helping her daughter with homework, taking her son to the free clinic for his cough, and trying to figure out how to stretch $20 until Friday. Now it was time for her night shift. She kissed her sleeping children goodbye, whispered a prayer, and headed out into the cold November evening. The bus ride to Golden Year's home care agency took 40 minutes. Maria used that time to close her eyes and rest, knowing she'd be on her feet for the next 12 hours. At 32 years old, she already felt twice that age. Being a single mom wasn't what she'd planned, but life rarely goes according to plan. When she arrived at the agency, her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, was waiting with a clipboard and a concerned look on her face. "Maria, I have a new assignment for you," Mrs. Chen said, not making eye contact. That was never a good sign. "Okay," Maria said slowly. "What's wrong with my regular client?" "Nothing. Mrs. Patterson is doing fine. But we have a situation." Mrs. Chen finally looked up. "We need someone for overnight care with a gentleman named William Hartley. He's 81, has Alzheimer's, and he's difficult." Maria had heard that word before. In this line of work, difficult could mean a lot of things. "How difficult?" she asked. Mrs. Chen sighed. "He's been through 7 caregivers in 3 months. He won't eat, barely speaks, and he gets agitated easily. But before you say no, I'm offering you an extra $2 an hour. I know you need it." Maria did need it. Her daughter's asthma medication had gone up in price again, and the school was asking for money for a field trip her son desperately wanted to go on. $2 an hour meant an extra $80 a week. That was groceries. That was the gas bill. "I'll take it," Maria said. Mrs. Chen looked relieved. "Thank you." "He's at Riverside Assisted Living, room 147. "Good luck." Riverside Assisted Living was one of the older facilities in town. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and the staff seemed to care. Maria signed in at the front desk and made her way down the quiet hallway to room 147. She knocked softly before entering. The room was dark except for a small lamp in the corner. An old man sat in a recliner by the window, completely still, staring at nothing. He was thin, with white hair and deeply lined face. "He wore simple pajamas and slippers, Mr. Hartley," Maria said gently. "My name is Maria. I'm going to be taking care of you tonight." No response. Not even a blink. Maria set down her bag and looked around the room. It was sparse. A bed, the chair, a small TV that didn't appear to be working, and a dresser. On top of the dresser were a few photographs in frames. She walked over to look at them. One photo showed a younger William Hartley in a military uniform, probably from the Vietnam era. He looked strong and confident. Another showed him with a woman who must have been his wife, both of them laughing at some long-ago moment. The third photo showed him holding a small boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old. "You were in the military," Maria said, even though she didn't expect an answer. "Thank you for your service." Nothing. She spent the next hour trying to get him to eat something. The dinner tray from earlier sat untouched on the small table. The soup was cold, the bread hard. She heated the soup in the microwave down the hall and brought it back. But when she tried to offer him a spoonful, he turned his head away. "Come on, Mr. Hartley," she said softly. "Just a few bites. You need to keep your strength up." He refused to even look at the food. Maria tried talking to him about the weather, about the facility, about anything she could think of. She got nothing in return. It was like talking to a statue. She'd dealt with Alzheimer's patients before, but this felt different. This man hadn't just lost his memory. He'd lost his will to be present at all. By midnight, Maria had managed to help him to the bathroom and get him settled back in his chair. He refused to lie down in bed. She'd learned from the night nurse that he often slept in that chair, if he slept at all. She pulled up a small chair beside him and sat down. Her feet hurt, her back ached, and she felt the weight of worry about her own kids at home with her elderly neighbor watching them. "I don't know if you can hear me, Mr. Hartley," she said quietly, "but I want you to know I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you need tonight, I'm here." She started tidying up the room, folding some clothes that had been left on the bed, organizing the items on his dresser. As she did, she found herself humming. It was something she did without thinking, a habit from her childhood. Her grandmother used to hum and sing all the time while she worked. The melody was an old lullaby, something her grandmother had sung to her in Spanish. Maria didn't realize she was humming until she noticed something change in the room. A shift in the air, maybe. She turned and saw that Mr. Hartley had moved his head. Just slightly, but he'd moved. He was turned toward her now, not looking at her exactly, but facing her direction. She stopped humming, and his head shifted back to its original position. Interesting, she thought. She started humming again, this time intentionally. The same lullaby, soft and low. Mr. Hartley's head turned toward her again. This time she could see his eyes had changed. They were still distant, but there was something there. A flicker of awareness, maybe. A recognition of something familiar. "You like music?" she asked gently. No verbal response, but his eyes stayed on her. Maria kept humming as she finished organizing the room. Then she sat back down in the chair beside him and began to sing the words softly. Her grandmother had taught her this song when she was little, during the hard times after her parents had divorced. It was a song about peace, about finding rest, about being safe. As she sang, something remarkable happened. A single tear rolled down Mr. Hartley's weathered cheek. Maria reached over and gently took his hand. It was cold and bony, but after a moment she felt his fingers tighten slightly around hers. They sat like that for a long time. Maria sang every lullaby she could remember, every hymn from church, every gentle song she'd ever sung to her own children. And William Hartley held her hand and listened, tears occasionally sliding down his face. Around 3 in the morning, his eyes finally began to close. His breathing became deeper, more regular. He was falling asleep. Maria kept singing, her voice growing softer and softer, until finally he was fully asleep, his hand still holding hers. She carefully released his hand and covered him with a blanket. She stood there for a moment, looking at this old man who everyone had given up on, and made a decision. She didn't know much about his life or why he'd ended up here, seemingly alone. She didn't know why music had reached him when nothing else could. But she knew one thing for certain. She was going to come back tomorrow night and the night after that and as many nights as it took. She was going to sing to him and care for him and treat him like the human being he was. Because if there was one thing Maria understood, it was loneliness. And nobody deserved to be that alone. As the sun began to rise, Maria wrote detailed notes for the day shift nurse about what had worked. She mentioned the music, the hand-holding, the response she'd seen. Then she gathered her things and headed home, already thinking about what song she'd sing tomorrow night. She had no idea that this one decision, this simple act of kindness, was about to change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. 3 weeks passed, and Maria's life fell into a new rhythm. She'd sleep from 8 a.m. until 2 p.m., spend the afternoon with her kids, make dinner, get them ready for bed, and then head to Riverside for her overnight shift with Mr. Hartley. Every single night, she sang to him. At first, the changes were small. He'd turn his head when she started humming. He'd hold her hand while she sang. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and tap his finger against the armrest of his chair, like he was keeping time with the music. But by the second week, something bigger happened. Maria was singing Amazing Grace while trying to get him to eat his dinner, and suddenly William Hartley opened his mouth and took a bite of mashed potatoes. Maria almost cried right there. She kept singing and he kept eating. Not much, just a few bites, but it was progress. Real, measurable progress. The day shift nurses started noticing changes too. Mr. Hartley wasn't as agitated during the day. He'd started sleeping better. One nurse told Maria that she'd heard him humming to himself, the same melody Maria sang every night. "Whatever you're doing," the nurse said, "keep doing it. He's like a different person." Maria learned more about William from the staff during her breaks. His wife Dorothy had died 5 years ago from cancer. They'd been married for over 50 years. After her death, William had tried to live alone, but the Alzheimer's had progressed quickly. He'd been moved to Riverside 2 years ago. "What about his family?" Maria asked. "Does anyone visit?" The nurses exchanged glances. "He has a son," one of them said carefully. "James. He pays all the bills on time, makes sure his father has everything he needs. But we hardly ever see him. Maybe once every few months, if that." Maria tried not to judge. People had their reasons. Maybe the son lived far away. Maybe seeing his father like this was too painful. She'd seen families torn apart by diseases like Alzheimer's. It was nobody's fault, really. It was just heartbreaking all around. Still, it made her sad to think of William sitting in that room day after day with no visitors. He started bringing little things from home to brighten up his space. A small plant for the windowsill, a CD player she'd found at a thrift store, along with some old CDs of classic music. She'd play them softly during her shift, mixing the recordings with her own singing. One night in the third week, something incredible happened. Maria was singing "What a Wonderful World" while helping William get ready for bed. She'd learned that music made everything easier, getting him to brush his teeth, to take his medication, to move from the chair to the bathroom. As long as she was singing, he cooperated. She was just finishing the verse about trees of green and red roses too, when she heard it. A voice, rough and quiet, but definitely a voice. William was singing with her. He didn't know all the words. Most of what came out was just humming. But during the chorus, she clearly heard him say, "Wonderful world." Maria stopped moving, frozen in place. "Mr. Hartley?" she whispered. "Can you talk to me?" His eyes met hers. Really met them, for the first time since she'd started working with him. There was confusion there, like he wasn't quite sure where he was or who she was, but there was also awareness. "Music," he said, his voice scratchy from disuse. "Dorothy not loved music, your wife?" Maria asked gently, sitting down beside him and taking his hand. He nodded slowly. A real nod, a real response. She sang every day. She had a beautiful voice, Maria prompted, like angels. His eyes filled with tears. "Miss her." Every day Maria felt her own tears coming. "I know you do." "I know." They sat together in the quiet room, just holding hands. After a while, William seemed to drift back into his distant state. But something had shifted. A door had opened, just a crack. From that night on, Maria made sure to talk to him about Dorothy. She asked the nurses if they had any information about his wife, and they found an old admission form that listed some basic details. Dorothy had been a music teacher. She'd taught piano and voice lessons from their home. That explained everything. Maria started learning new songs, picking ones that a music teacher might have loved. Show tunes from old musicals, classical pieces she found on YouTube and memorized. Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, The Great American Songbook. William responded to all of it. He started eating more regularly. He began sleeping in his bed instead of the chair. Some nights he'd say a few words, usually about Dorothy or about his childhood. The words came out jumbled sometimes, confused, but they were words nonetheless. Maria started bringing photos from her own life to share with him. Pictures of her kids, her small apartment, her mother who lived 2 states away. She'd tell him stories about her day while she sang to him. About her daughter getting a B on her math test. About her son losing his first tooth. "You remind me of her," William said one night, his words coming slow and careful. "Kind, like Dorothy." "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me," Maria told him honestly. But it wasn't all progress and breakthroughs. Some nights were hard. William would get agitated, confused about where Dorothy was, asking for her over and over. Maria learned to redirect him gently, to comfort him through the confusion, to sing until the agitation passed. She never complained, never showed frustration. This was the job, yes, but it had become more than that. She genuinely cared about this old man. She found herself thinking about him during the day, wondering how he was doing, looking forward to seeing him at night. Her kids noticed the change in her. "You seem happier, Mama," her daughter said one afternoon. "Do I?" Maria asked. "Yeah, you smile more." Maria realized it was true. Despite the exhaustion, despite the difficulty of the work, she felt good about what she was doing. She was making a real difference in someone's life. In a world that often felt cold and unfair, she was bringing warmth and comfort to someone who needed it desperately. By the end of the third week, the other caregivers at the facility were asking Maria for advice. Mr. Hartley had become something of a success story. The difficult patient who'd gone through 7 caregivers was now cooperative, eating well and occasionally even smiling. "What's your secret?" another caregiver asked her. Maria shrugged. "No secret. I just treat him like a person. I listen, and I sing. That's it?" "That's it," Maria said. Sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful. What Maria didn't know was that her simple kindness had already been noticed by someone else. Someone who'd been watching from far away, night after night, witnessing every song, Every gentle touch, every moment of patient care. Someone who was about to step out of the shadows and change everything. One night, as Maria was singing Unchained Melody to William, she noticed something different, a feeling like she was being watched. She glanced at the doorway but saw nothing. The hallway was empty. She shook off the feeling and continued singing, holding William's hand as his eyes slowly closed. He was at peace, finally resting without the agitation that had defined him for so long. After he fell asleep, Maria stood and stretched. Her back was sore and she needed coffee. She walked down to the break room, lost in thought about the grocery list she needed to make and whether she could afford to buy her daughter new shoes this week. When she came back 15 minutes later, there was an envelope on the small table in William's room. A plain white envelope with her name written on it in neat handwriting. Maria picked it up, confused. She opened it carefully and found a note written on expensive-looking paper. "Ms. Torres, I need to speak with you. Please call this number at your earliest convenience. It's regarding Mr. Hartley, James Hartley." At the bottom was a phone number. Maria's heart started racing. She'd been doing well, hadn't she? William was improving. What could his son possibly want? Was she in trouble? Had she done something wrong? She looked over at William, sleeping peacefully in his bed, and felt a sudden surge of protectiveness. Whatever this was about, she wasn't going to let anyone upset the progress they'd made. She folded the note and put it in her pocket. She'd call tomorrow after she'd gotten some sleep and could think clearly. But as she sat back down in her chair to watch over William for the rest of the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. James Hartley sat in his downtown office on the 40th floor, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday and he was still at work. Then again, he was always at work. At 48 years old, James had built Hartley Industries into a tech company worth over $200 million. They specialized in healthcare software, ironically enough, software that helped hospitals and care facilities manage patient data, track medications, monitor vital signs. He employed over 300 people. He'd been featured in business magazines. He had more money than he could spend in several lifetimes, and he was absolutely miserable. His phone buzzed with another email, another problem that needed solving, another fire to put out. But instead of opening his email, James clicked on a different window on his screen, one he'd been checking obsessively for the past 2 weeks. It was a video feed from his father's room at Riverside. James had installed the camera a month ago, after the facility had called to tell him his father wasn't eating, and they were concerned about his declining health. The call had filled him with a familiar mix of guilt and helplessness. So he'd done what he always did, threw money at the problem. He'd authorized the camera installation, telling himself it was so he could check on his father's care. The truth was more complicated. At first, he'd watched out of guilt, forcing himself to see what he'd been avoiding. His father sitting alone in that chair, staring at nothing. It was painful to watch. His strong, brilliant father reduced to this. The man who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd helped him with algebra homework, who'd built a successful business from nothing, was just gone. James had started avoiding the video feed after a few days. It hurt too much, but then something changed. About 3 weeks ago, he'd logged in late one night during a bout of insomnia and saw something different. There was a woman in his father's room. A caregiver, he assumed. She was singing. At first, James was confused. Why was she singing? Shouldn't she be doing her actual job? But then he saw his father's face. Really looked at it. His father had turned toward her. His father was listening. James watched the whole night shift. He watched this woman, this caregiver, sing song after song while she worked. He watched her hold his father's hand. He watched her talk to him gently, treating him with a dignity and respect that James hadn't seen from previous caregivers. He'd looked up her name from the facility records. Maria Torres. Single mother. Worked the overnight shift. Had been through the agency's standard training, but nothing special. Just another caregiver, except she wasn't just another caregiver. James started watching every night. He'd come home from the office around midnight, pour himself a drink and pull up the feed. He told himself he was monitoring his father's care, making sure the facility was doing their job. But really, he was watching Maria. He watched her bring a plant for the windowsill. He watched her play music from an old CD player. He watched her show his father pictures and tell stories. He watched her patience when his father got confused or agitated, and he watched the changes in his father, the way he started eating, the way he started sleeping better, the way he occasionally smiled or said a few words. His father was coming back. Not all the way, probably never all the way, but he was present again. He was engaged with life, all because of this woman who sang to him every night. James had cried watching it. Actual tears. Something he hadn't allowed himself to do since his mother's funeral 5 years ago. He'd cried because his father was finally getting what he needed. And he'd cried because it had taken a stranger making minimum wage to give his father what James, with all his money and resources, had failed to provide: love, attention, human connection. The guilt was crushing. James had convinced himself that paying for the best facility, the best doctors, the best care was enough. He'd told himself he was too busy to visit. That work was important, that his father wouldn't know the difference anyway. But his father had known. On some level, even through the fog of Alzheimer's, his father had known he was alone. 2 nights ago, James had watched Maria sing "What a Wonderful World" to his father. He'd seen his father smile, really smile, and mouth the words along with her. And he'd made a decision. He needed to meet her. He needed to thank her. And he needed to make sure she never left his father's side. James had spent the last 2 days working out the details. He'd consulted with lawyers, with financial advisors, with his HR department. He'd crafted an offer that he hoped would convince her to become his father's private caregiver. He knew it was risky. She might think he was crazy. She might be suspicious of his motives. But he had to try. Tonight he'd left the note in his father's room during a brief visit while Maria was on her break. He'd stood in that room for 10 minutes looking at his father sleeping peacefully, seeing the small changes that Maria had made. The photos on the dresser were dusted. There were fresh flowers in a vase. The room felt cared for, lived in. His father looked better. Thinner than before, yes, but his face was peaceful. Not that expression of confused anguish James had seen on previous visits. He'd left before Maria returned because he wasn't ready to meet her yet. He wanted to think through what he'd say, how he'd explain without sounding like a stalker who'd been watching video feeds of her for weeks. Now, sitting in his office in the middle of the night, James wondered if she'd call. Maybe she'd think it was some kind of complaint. Maybe she'd be scared. Maybe she'd ignore it completely. His phone rang, startling him. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. His heart started pounding as he answered. "Hello? Mr. Hartley?" A woman's voice, tentative. "This is Maria Torres. I got your note," James sat up straighter. "Ms. Torres, thank you for calling. I hope I didn't frighten you with the note." "I was a little worried," she admitted. "Is everything okay with your father?" The genuine concern in her voice made James's throat tight. "Actually, he's better than he's been in years. And that's because of you." There was a pause. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Hartley." "No," James said firmly. "You're doing much more than that. I've seen what you do for him. The music, the kindness, the way you talk to him. You've given him something I couldn't." Another pause. "I don't understand. Have you been visiting?" "I haven't seen you." James took a deep breath. "I need to be honest with you. I installed a camera in my father's room a few weeks ago. I've been watching the care he receives. And I've been watching you." He heard her sharp intake of breath. "You've been watching me?" "I know how that sounds," James said quickly. It's not like that. I was worried about my father. I wanted to make sure he was being cared for properly. And what I saw was you transforming his life." Maria was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not sure how I feel about being recorded without my knowledge. You're right to be upset. I should have told you. But Ms. Torres, please, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? Tomorrow, anytime that works for you. I have a proposition for you, and I think you'll want to hear it." "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that could change your life," James said. "And ensure my father continues to get the care he needs. Please, just give me an hour of your time." He could hear her breathing, could almost feel her weighing the decision. Finally, she spoke. "I have to get my kids to school in the morning. I could meet you at 10 a.m. There's a coffee shop on 5th Street, the Daily Grind. Do you know it?" "I'll find it," James said. "Thank you, Ms. Torres. Call me Maria," she said softly. "And Mr. Hartley? Your father talks about you sometimes. When he's having a clear moment. He's proud of you." The words hit James like a physical blow. "He does?" "Yes, he says you're brilliant. That you built something wonderful. He might not always remember exactly what, But he remembers being proud. James couldn't speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was rough. Thank you for telling me that. After they hung up, James sat in the darkness of his office and let himself cry. Really cry for the first time in years. He cried for his father, for his mother, for all the time he'd wasted, for all the visits he hadn't made. And he cried because a stranger had given his father more love and attention in 3 weeks than James had given him in 3 years. Tomorrow, he'd try to make it right. He'd offer Maria whatever it took to keep her in his father's life. And maybe if he was lucky, she'd help him figure out how to be a better son with whatever time his father had left. He pulled up the video feed one more time. Maria was back in the room, sitting in her chair beside his father's bed. She was reading a book, her lips moving slightly as she read silently. Every few minutes she'd look up to check on his father, making sure he was sleeping peacefully. James realized he'd been wrong about so many things. Wrong to think money could replace presence. Wrong to think his father wouldn't notice his absence. Wrong to think it was too late to change. But maybe with Maria's help he could start to make things right. He shut down his computer and headed home, already planning what he'd say tomorrow. He had one chance to convince her, one chance to give his father the gift of her continued care. He couldn't mess this up. Maria walked into the daily grind at exactly 10 a.m., her heart pounding. She'd barely slept after her shift ended, her mind racing with possibilities. What could James Hartley possibly want? And why had he been watching her? She spotted him immediately. He sat at a corner table wearing an expensive-looking suit but no tie, his dark hair slightly disheveled. He looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. When he saw her, he stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his coffee. "Maria," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." His handshake was firm but not aggressive. Up close, she could see the resemblance to his father. The same bone structure, the same eyes, though James's were sharper, more alert. "I almost didn't," Maria said honestly, sitting down across from him. "I'm still not sure how I feel about being recorded." James winced. "I know, I'm sorry. If it helps, the camera is there for safety and monitoring. The facility knew about it. But I should have made sure all the caregivers knew too. That's on me." A waitress came by and Maria ordered a coffee. She needed the caffeine after her sleepless morning. "So," she said once the waitress left, "you said you had a proposition?" James leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "First, I need you to understand something. My father is better because of you. In 3 weeks, you've accomplished what months of professional care couldn't. He's eating, sleeping, engaging. The facility says he's like a different person." Maria felt her cheeks warm. "I just treat him with respect. I talk to him like he's still there because he is. He's just lost sometimes." "Exactly," James said. "You see him as a person, not a patient. And the music. My mother was a music teacher." "Did you know that?" Maria nodded. "The nurses told me. She sang constantly. Around the house, in the car, everywhere. After she died, it was like the music died too. My father stopped listening to it. I think it hurt too much." James paused, his voice getting rough. "But you brought it back. You gave him that connection again." The waitress brought Maria's coffee. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, waiting for James to continue. "I want to hire you as my father's private, full-time caregiver," James said. "I'll pay you $75,000 a year, plus full health insurance for you and your children." Maria nearly dropped her coffee. "What?" "I'll also provide housing if you need it. A small house near wherever we set up care for my father. I'm planning to move him out of Riverside into a private home with a garden, somewhere quiet and peaceful. You'd work primarily day shifts so you can sleep normal hours. I'll hire additional help for nights and your days off." Maria's mind was spinning. $75,000? She currently made $23,000 working overnight shifts. This was more than triple that. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "Why would you pay me that much? You could hire someone with way more experience for less. Because experience isn't what my father needs. He needs you. He responds to you." James pulled out his phone and after a moment's hesitation turned it toward her. "I want to show you something, but I want your permission first." "It's footage from the camera." Maria nodded and James played a video. It was from 2 nights ago, the night William had sung along with her. She watched herself singing, "What a Wonderful World," watched William's face light up, heard his raspy voice joining hers. She hadn't realized how transformative that moment had been. Seeing it from the outside, she understood why James was emotional. "That's my fatty." "Her," James said, his voice thick. "Really my father, not just the shell of him. You brought him back." Maria handed him back his phone. "Mr. Hartley, I appreciate this offer, but it seems too good to be true." "What's the catch?" James sat back. "No catch. But I need to be completely honest with you about why I'm doing this." He spent the next 20 minutes telling her everything. About his guilt over not visiting. About his mother's death and how he'd buried himself in work to avoid the pain. About watching Maria care for his father and realizing how badly he'd failed as a son. "I can't get back the time I lost," James said. "But I can make sure my father has quality time for however long he has left. And I can try to be a better son now. But I need your help. I don't know how to connect with him like you do." Maria studied him carefully. She'd expected some wealthy businessman who thought money could solve everything. Instead, she saw a man who was genuinely broken, genuinely trying to fix his mistakes. "If I say yes," Maria said slowly, "I have conditions." "Name them." "First, I need this in writing, a real contract. I have kids depending on me. I can't accept a verbal promise that could disappear tomorrow." "Absolutely. My lawyer will draw up a contract. It'll include severance protection too. Even if something happens and you can't work, you'll receive 6 months of pay." Maria nodded. "Second, I need to finish my obligations to my current clients through the agency. I can't just abandon them. Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks is fine." "Third," Maria said, her voice firm, "if you're going to be around your father more, you need to actually be around him, not just check in for 5 minutes and leave. I'll teach you what I do, but you have to show up." "Really show up," James met her eyes. "I can do that. I want to do that." "And finally," Maria said, "this isn't just about the money for me. I care about your father. If I ever feel like this arrangement isn't what's best for him, I'm walking away. His well-being comes first. Always." "I wouldn't want it any other way," James said. They talked for another hour about logistics. James was planning to buy a small house in a quiet neighborhood, something with a garden and a porch. He'd hire contractors to make it wheelchair accessible and safe for someone with Alzheimer's. He'd set up a music room where Maria could sing with William, maybe even bring in a piano. "Your kids," James said suddenly. "How old are they?" "My daughter is 9, my son is 7. "The health insurance will cover everything? Your daughter's asthma, any other needs?" Maria nodded, feeling tears threaten. The asthma medication alone cost her $300 a month with her current insurance. "Yes, that's huge for us." "Good." James looked relieved. "And if they ever need anything else, tutoring, school supplies, whatever, let me know." "I mean it, Mr. Hartley." "James, please." "James," Maria corrected herself. "Why are you being so generous?" "I'm just doing what anyone should do." "But that's the point," James said quietly. "Not everyone does do it. You could have just gone through the motions, collected your paycheck, and gone home. Instead, you brought plants and music and photos. You held his hand and sang to him. You treated him like he mattered." He paused. "You gave him dignity. That's priceless." Maria felt the tears spill over. "He does matter. Every person matters." "I know that now," James said. "I forgot for a while. But you reminded me." They finalized the details before parting ways. James would have the contract ready in 3 days. Maria would give her notice at the agency and spend her final 2 weeks preparing William for the transition. James would start visiting regularly, learning from Maria how to connect with his father. As Maria walked to her car, her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Thank you for giving me a second chance to be a good son." "Okay," she typed back. "Thank you for trusting me with your father." That night, Maria's shift felt different. She knew it was one of her last nights at Riverside. As she sang to William, holding his hand while he drifted off to sleep, she thought about how her life was about to change. $75,000 a year. Health insurance. A stable job doing what she loved. She'd be able to buy her daughter those new shoes without checking her bank account first. Her son could go on that field trip. She could maybe even start saving money for the first time in her adult life. But more than that, she'd get to keep caring for William. And she'd help James rebuild his relationship with his father. That felt even more valuable than the money. "Big changes coming," she whispered to William as he slept. "Good changes. You're going to have a beautiful home with a garden. Your son is going to visit you all the time." And I'll still be here singing to you every day. William stirred slightly in his sleep, a small smile on his face. Maria pulled out her phone and texted her mother, "Mom, you won't believe what happened today. Call me when you can. Everything's going to be okay now." For the first time in years, Maria actually believed it. Everything really was going to be okay. 6 months later, Maria stood in the kitchen of William's new home, making him his favorite vegetable soup. Through the window, she could see him sitting in the garden with James, the two of them watching birds at the feeder James had installed. The house was perfect. A small single-story home in a quiet neighborhood with mature trees and a fenced backyard. James had thought of everything: wide doorways for a wheelchair if needed, a walk-in shower with safety rails, ramps instead of steps. But he'd also made it feel like a home, not a medical facility. Family photos covered the walls. Music played softly from speakers in every room. The furniture was comfortable and welcoming. Maria had moved her kids into a small apartment just 3 blocks away, close enough that she could walk to work. For the first time in years, she had her own place, not sharing with her elderly neighbor or her sister. Her daughter's asthma was under control with proper medication. Her son had joined the school's soccer team. They were thriving, but the biggest change wasn't in Maria's circumstances. It was in James. That first week after William moved in, James had shown up every single day. He'd sit with Maria and watch how she interacted with his father. How she'd start every morning with a song. How she'd narrate what she was doing, keeping William engaged. How she'd hold his hand during moments of confusion and redirect him gently when he got agitated. "Your turn," Maria had said on day 3, gesturing for James to sit beside his father. "I don't know what to say to him," James had admitted, looking uncomfortable. "Start with something simple. Tell him about your day. He might not respond, but he's listening." James had tried, his words stilted and awkward at first, but William had turned toward his son's voice and something in James had cracked open. He'd started telling his father about work, about a problem he was trying to solve, and William had squeezed his hand. "He's proud of you," Maria had said softly. "How can you tell?" "Look at his face." James had looked, really looked, and saw the ghost of a smile on his father's weathered features. That's when James had finally broken down, crying while holding his father's hand, apologizing for all the visits he'd missed, all the time he'd wasted. William might not have understood all the words, but he'd understood the emotion. He'd reached up with his other hand and touched James's face the way he probably had when James was a child. That had been the turning point. Now, 6 months later, James visited 4 times a week. He'd cut back his hours at work, delegating more to his management team. He'd learned all the songs Maria sang. He'd started reading to his father from the newspaper, from old books they'd found in storage from anywhere. The 3 of them had developed a routine. Mornings were for breakfast and music. Afternoons were for sitting in the garden or watching old movies. Evenings were for quiet conversation and singing William to sleep. William was doing better than anyone had expected. He'd never fully recover, they all knew that. Alzheimer's doesn't work backwards. But he was present more often than not. He recognized James every time now. He knew Maria's voice before she even entered a room. He said more words, expressed more emotions. The neurologist was baffled by his improvement and wanted to write a paper about the case. Maria had just laughed. There was no medical miracle here. Just love, attention, and music. Maria brought the soup outside on a tray. "Lunchtime," she called. James helped his father to the patio table and they all sat together. This had become their tradition, eating together as if they were a family. In a way they were. Not a conventional family, but a family nonetheless. "Maria," William said suddenly, his voice clearer than usual. "Sing the one about the river, Moon River?" Maria asked. William nodded, smiling. As Maria sang, she watched James holding his father's hand, both of them swaying slightly to the music. This was what healing looked like. Not just William's healing, but James's too. The months that followed brought both joy and sorrow. William had good days and bad days. On good days, he'd work in the garden with James, talk about old memories, even joke around. On bad days, he'd be confused about where Dorothy was, agitated about things that didn't make sense. But James never left during the bad days. He'd learned from Maria how to stay present, How to comfort without trying to force reality on someone whose reality was fractured. One evening in early spring, 15 months after Maria had first started caring for William, James pulled her aside after William had gone to sleep. "I need to tell you something, James S.E. Aide. And I need to say thank you." "You thank me all the time," Maria said with a smile. "Not for this." "Not properly." James's eyes were damp. "My father is dying. The doctor says maybe a few more months. His heart is weak." Maria had known this was coming. William had been declining slowly over the past few weeks, but hearing it said out loud still hurt. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be sorry. Because of you, I got this time with him. Real time, not just obligatory visits. I got to know my father again. I got to tell him I love him and hear him say it back. I got to just be his son." James wiped his eyes. "You gave me that gift, and I'll never be able to repay you." "You already have," Maria said. "You gave me and my kids stability. You gave me a job I love. You gave me hope that good people still exist." They stood together in the quiet hallway. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something like family. William Hartley passed away on a sunny morning in May, Maria singing softly to him while James held his hand. His last words were beautiful, though whether he meant the song, the sunshine, or something else, they'd never know. The funeral was small, but meaningful. James spoke about his father's life, his service, his love for Dorothy, his pride in his son. He spoke about the importance of presence, of not waiting until it's too late. And he publicly thanked Maria, telling everyone assembled how one woman's kindness had transformed not just his father's final years, but James's entire life. After the funeral, James asked Maria to meet him at his office. She went, unsure what to expect. Maybe the job was ending. Maybe he needed to move on with his life. Instead, James showed her plans for the William and Dorothy Hartley Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to training caregivers in compassionate care and providing scholarships for the children of caregivers. "I want you to run it," James said. "As the director, you'd train other caregivers, share what you do, help families understand how to care for loved ones with Alzheimer's and other conditions." "James, I don't have a degree in nonprofit management." "I don't. You have something better. You have experience, compassion, and a gift for connecting with people. We'll hire business managers to handle the administrative stuff. But the heart of this foundation needs to be someone who understands what real care looks like. That's you." Maria had said yes, and the foundation launched 6 months later. She trained dozens of caregivers, teaching them about music therapy, about treating patients with dignity, about staying present during difficult moments. She shared William's story, always with James's permission, as an example of how much difference one person could make. James funded the foundation generously and served on the board, but he also went back to living his life. He started dating again. He reconnected with old friends. He found balance between work and life, but he never forgot the lessons he'd learned. And he visited his parents' graves every Sunday, usually bringing flowers, always bringing music. Maria's kids grew up calling James Uncle James. He attended their school events, helped with college applications, gave them advice when they needed it. He became part of their lives in a way that felt natural and right. 5 years after William's death, Maria stood at a podium at a healthcare conference, speaking to a room of several hundred caregivers and medical professionals. She told them about William, about James, about how singing to one lonely old man had changed multiple lives. "We have this idea that big changes require big actions," Maria said. "But sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. Holding someone's hand, singing a song, treating someone like they matter, these aren't small things. These are everything." After her speech, a young caregiver approached her, nervous. "Ms. Torres, I work with an elderly patient who doesn't respond to anything. I was about to quit, but after hearing your story, I want to try music. Do you think it could work?" Maria smiled, thinking of William, of that first night when she'd hummed without even thinking about it. "It might. But even if it doesn't, keep trying. Keep being present. Keep treating them with love. That's what matters." That night, Maria went home to her family, her kids now teenagers who were heading toward college. She thought about how far they'd all come from that tiny apartment where she'd struggled to pay bills, where she'd worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. She thought about William's smile when she sang, about James's transformation from a workaholic running from grief to a man who understood what truly mattered, about all the caregivers she'd trained who were now out there making differences in people's lives. Before bed, Maria did what she did every night. She put on some music, closed her eyes, and sang softly. The same lullaby her grandmother had taught her. The same one she'd first sung to William, and she thanked God or the universe or whatever force had guided her to room 147 at Riverside Assisted Living that November night years ago. Because that one assignment, that one difficult patient, had been the beginning of everything good in her life. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives don't announce themselves with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the form of a lonely old man in a chair, waiting for someone to see him, to really see him, and to remind him through song that he still mattered. Maria had been that someone for William, and in return, William and James had changed her life forever. The greatest gifts, she'd learned, aren't always the ones wrapped in fancy paper. Sometimes they're wrapped in obligation, in difficulty, in the mundane work of showing up and caring. But when you unwrap them with love and patience, you find treasures beyond anything you could have imagined. All because she'd chosen kindness when it cost her everything, and she'd do it again in a heartbeat.